What's up? All right, so look, here's the deal. We are going to kind of what might be take a little bit of a different tact on this because I've spent the better part of 28 and a half years as a school administrator, principal, director, superintendent, and I also spent the greater part of 13 years in the classroom. I've been at three different institutions, Auburn, LSU, and Southeastern most recently. And so public education has kind of been the world that I've lived in. But I've often told people, and still do tell people, that wherever I work at a position, at the moment I work at Southeastern, but I work for a Jewish carpenter. And so the notion of how do you understand where we have kind of gotten to in public education, we're going to kind of take a quick 30-minute journey through that. Now, it may feel like the last 10 seconds of a car commercial where they're doing all the APRs and everything else because we're rolling, okay? So stay with me, all right? But I've brought some, I tend to be old school. I tend to keep my articles just on hard copies, and I've kind of brought some, so if you want to just shoot pictures of them or something, you can kind of see that and kind of go from there. If there are, I know there's at least one guy in this room that remembers that. There was a band from Louisiana called Pot Liquor. I hear some laughter coming out. This was one of their songs, and it's a classic, really, because I know where I want to go, but you can't get there from here. Well, I'm afraid that's kind of where we might be getting to in public education. So let me explain to you what's going on. And by the way, my name is Wade. It's not Doctor. So if you got some kind of conversation we want to have. Anybody know what PARC stands for? If you don't, now you do. It's the Partnership for Assessment of Readiness for College and Careers. That's what lit this candle. And it was a few years ago. And the reason we were told that, because I sat in a meeting where this was explained to me, was that legislation requires comparative testing to determine how our students were going to perform with all these other students who were taking these same tests. So that's what lit the candle. Have you heard anything about that lately? Not really. Why not? Because in our state, we now take some questions from our state and we mix them in with these questions from the other state, from the other test. Now, what that basically means is, I'm not going to bore you with all the craziness of it, but there's something called a norm reference test where you try to spread scores. And then there's something called a criterion reference test where you try to get, if you got a doctor, you want a criterion reference doctor. You want someone that has a good cure rate, and so you want to make sure you're not trying to spread scores. We have taken our test and we put them both together. So what we've essentially said is you can put diesel in your Corvette and it'll run just fine. Because that's what we're trying to do with our test right now. It cannot be used for comparative purposes. But yet the state legislature, or the legislation that drove this whole thing, says one of the primary reasons we're going to PARC is so that we can compare our scores. We can't. So, another thing we were told is all these states are buying in. I have a little opt-out up here. You will see that's no longer the case. Many of the states that were all in are now all out. They left. So the original purpose has kind of been abandoned. But isn't that often the case? Where the things that are left behind are the things that you have to deal with because the original purpose went bye-bye. Well, that's where we are kind of today. So, everybody agree with that first one? Amen? You give me enough time and enough rope, I'll figure out some kind of way to hang myself. That's human nature, isn't it? Well, here's the deal. We need to see if Bill Gates has kind of taken some of that metaphorical rope. Why are we talking about Bill Gates? Because Bill Gates was, for all intents and purposes, was the progenitor of Common Core. Because the Bill Gates Foundation was absolutely instrumental in saying that we need to come up with this way to make some of this stuff happen. So it's very relevant to understand what he said. Now these are his own words in a speech that he was giving. His goal, which I think is admirable, all students should get a great public education and graduate with the skills to succeed in the workplace. No problems yet. But the question is, how much rope did he, because he starts giving himself some rope in the rest of the quote. He says, first of all, he says we're not doing very well in the quality metrics, math scores, so forth and so on. Then he says, much has been done, and this is an organization of economically developed countries. I don't remember exactly what OECD stands for, but that's basically what it is. He says this incredible statement. When we disaggregate by race, we see two Americas. One, where white students perform along the lines of the best in the world, with achievement comparable to countries like Finland, and what's one of the countries that's always thrown up as an exemplar when it comes to test scores? Finland. And students in the lowest performing countries, such as Chile and Greece. So we need to hang on to that thought. We have two Americas. He just hung himself. Do you see what happened? It has nothing to do with race. That is not the issue. But I got to ask you this. How do you explain a curriculum that simultaneously brings some of these people to the highest performing levels in the world, but then would also be responsible for simultaneously bringing another portion of them to a poor performing level? How can a teacher do that? How can you be in a room with students and simultaneously take these students to high levels of achievement while these others sit here and fail? How does that happen? But yet that's what we've got. So the question then becomes, if the problem is not the curriculum, because what is this all about? Curriculum. If the problem is not the curriculum, will curriculum solve the problem? So what we're starting, so I want to give, now I've got an article up here written in 2000 by Gary Traub, Schools Are Not the Answer, or schools are, what no school can do. You can look it up, you can find it yourself. It was written 20 years ago. It sounds like it was written 20 seconds ago. And this is what happens when you find something that makes sense, because it tends to keep making sense. So if the problem isn't the curriculum, will the curriculum solve it? Negative. So here's an analogy. Mr. Gates discovered that his truck was broke. So he decided the best thing to do was to paint the house. Now, this creates a certainty. We are absolutely sure that painting the house will not fix the broke truck. What we don't know is, does the house even need painting? You understand what I'm saying? We have suggested a solution when the solution we know is disconnected to the real issue, but now the question becomes, what are the problems that can result because you have taken this course of action? We haven't decided that yet. But in my few minutes given to me, rest assured we will try to whack that mold. So now we get to go to college. Self-efficacy, which you probably never heard, but it's extremely important to you. Self-efficacy is the belief in your ability to execute and organize successful courses of action necessary for attainment of goals. Let me say that again. It's the belief in your ability to organize and execute something that works. It's what you believe you can do, given the right resources, given the correct amount of time. You get the picture. Sounds a lot like confidence. It's a little different, but the whole notion is you have to do two things. You have to organize, you have to execute. So if you have a high belief in your ability to organize and execute, that's you on the left. Outcome expectancy is pretty much self-explanatory. What is outcome expectancy? What I think is going to come out of this. So what makes you tick, what makes me tick, what makes everyone tick is primarily two things. A, I believe I can organize and execute this thing to make it work. B, I believe if I do that, it's worth doing. You put those two things together, and you have a motivated person. So here's the deal. If I believe I can do it, high self-efficacy, I believe it's important, high outcome expectancy, then I tend to be actively engaged. Where do you want you to be? Where do you want your students to be? If you own a business, where do you want your business people to be? Actively engaged. If I believe I can do it, but I don't value the outcome, I tend to protest. Now, if you have students, you have a lot of them that live in that area of protest, but you override that with threats, coercion, encouragement, and so they'll come back to active engagement. So it's not like all of these are just little boxes, right? But you kind of can move between them. But this is where it starts to get nasty. Let's go to low and low first. I don't think I can do it. I don't think I can organize it. I don't think it's important. What do I care, right? Purity, apathy. I don't think I can do it. I know it's important. Stress. Now, let me explain to you, if you've ever dealt with a 16-year-old male sitting in your classroom, they are not going to walk up to you and go, hey, doc, I've got to tell you, I know this test we're about to take is really important. I'm feeling a lot of stress, and I'm just not sure about my abilities to organize and execute. No, they're going to walk up to you and go, I don't care. I don't care. But their veins will be bulging, their nostrils will be flaring. In other words, what you'll see is all kind of emotion. That ain't apathy, folks. That's stress being passed off is I don't care. So some of you are sitting there at home at night and you're dealing with this, stress. Because they're coming home going, I don't know how to do this. And what they're really saying is, I don't know how to organize and execute it, but I do know it's important. Because if you tell a fifth grader you got to do your homework, adults are the closest thing to God on this planet to them. Whatever they tell them is true. So when you say it's important or the teacher says it's important, and then when the teacher tells you that's wrong, that can be crushing. And we're going to talk about that in a second, about how that kind of thing can really blow up in your face. If the problem's so bad that you have no belief in your ability to do it, but you believe it's very important, that's where suicide comes from. I cannot control the situation. It is out of control. It is so important, I can't manage it. There's only one solution. I'm checking out. So this is a real kind of a down and dirty thing. You go, well, like the first time I talked to a lady one time, she said, so what's this self-efficacy stuff, right? So hang with me for a second. What does it influence? Well, your belief in your ability to do something, to organize and execute it properly, to make the task occur successfully, will influence the courses of action that you choose. Doesn't that make sense? It will, the degree of effort, how long you will persevere. Whether you are resilient when the first time you do it, it blows up. Whether your thoughts help, whether your thoughts don't help. How much distress and depression that you feel in coping with a taxing environmental demand. And finally, the level of success realized. Now, the research behind this is empirically validated. Trust me. We don't have time to go into it, but there's 4 ways that you can help someone believe that they can organize and execute something. We're going to do them very quickly. The first one's called an enactive mastery experience. What does that sound like? Enactive mastery experience. That's Nike. Just do it. If you want someone to do something successfully and they do it successfully, guess what? They tend to believe that they can do it successfully. Duh, right? The second one would be modeling. Kids see this all the time. And there's all kind of caveats that I should be giving. I just don't have time to do it. But modeling is another way where someone can learn, oh, I can do that. The third one is verbal persuasion. It's the one we all use. We've become so politically correct today, though, we want to effusively praise the kids because they walked in the room and sat down. And it's like, well, then this is just bull squatch. Because you say that so many times, and it loses all meaning. And there is no meaning anymore. So when we start going, Timmy, I've never seen anybody sit in a chair so well as you just did. Timmy and everybody else in the room is just checked out because this isn't real verbal persuasion. And the last one is physical arousal. Never say that in a middle school class. Never. But physical arousal is very simple. Physical arousal is that notion of when you hand that kid back a test and it's got good job and you kind of thump them on the head and you walk off and you get that feeling of, ooh, I just did this. And that impacts your belief that you can do this. Now, you will notice nothing that we talked about there had a thing to do with punishment, stress, overbearing kinds of expectations. Because if I throw something at you and ask you, perfect example, you can high jump 5'2". You've worked really hard to high jump 5'2". But Common Core says tomorrow you should high jump 6'6". So I hand you this thing and say, here's what you need to do. Survey says, what's your reaction? You're telling me it's important. I know I can't do it. So what do you ultimately do? That's it. If you're going to put me in that position, teach me, by God. I dare you. And I'm just going to fold my arms up because it's the only out that I've got. So this notion of what triggers us to do things, by the way, very scriptural. Because Job was in the book of Job, the whole notion of is that Satan says, give me the environment. Give me the environment, and I will wreck this dude. And God says, you can have the environment. Because it's the beliefs that really drive the behavior, not the environment. And so the notion of what these kids believe, what you believe, is much more important than the environment you find yourself in. If that's not the case, what are you going to do when cancer hits you? Because you either give up on God at that point, or you say, to live is Christ, to die is gain. So if this is where I'm going, let's get off of this interstate. And give me some people down at the funeral home, right? And they can kind of, he was a great dude, you know. That's what you hope anyway. So, remember one of the things that we said at first is that we want to make sure that we've got these really good teachers and this really good curriculum, because that's all it's going to take, folks. We put those two things together, and kids are going to soar. Well, I want you to look at that pie chart. This is from a very legitimate report from the Educational Testing Services. The guy, Enghoff, is an emeritus professor from Stanford, eminent scholar. How much variance in student test scores is due to teachers? The teachers are the little blue part, or purple, I guess blue. Do you notice what it is? It's small. So here's another mistake we've made. We have fundamentally said teachers are going to be the deal that just absolutely light this candle and drive this whole thing the way it needs to go. Research says, no, that's not going to be the case at all. There's all kind of factors. Other school factors fit in there. Out of school factors, notice, begin to outweigh. And then look at the worst one of all. We don't know. Have you ever tried to figure out humans? They're not simple. And so when we do social science research, and if we can explain 30% of the variance, we're like, golly, good. But what does that tell you? If we can explain 30% of it, where's the rest of it? I don't know. I can't tell you that. Do you understand what's happening here? So what that does is that really goes down to, in the pie chart, that's about 12%, 10 to 12%. Enghoff makes that point in his article. That means 88% of whatever is happening that creates these test score gains did not come from where? The teacher. Oh, but who's being held singularly responsible for all of this stuff? The teacher. Now, I tell principals when I teach classes, the definition of a principal is the person responsible for everything and in charge of nothing. And this is very, very close to that phenomenon. Now, it's not that we're not helping. It's not that teachers don't make a difference. You can think back to some of these teachers 30, 40 years ago and say, that person saved my life. That person, whatever. But what we're simply saying is the difference in test score gains is not near as big as what some people would have you believe. Okay. State School Officers Council of Chiefs, John was part of this, John White. Number 1, states define the content, knowledge, and skills that all students must know. Number 2, those skills are included on state tests. Number 3, teachers will uniformly teach and students will learn. So this is what this is the conclusion. We're expecting a solution to come from a curriculum that isn't even sensitive to the actual problem of the selective success of Americans. What did Mr. Gates say immediately? One portion of our population is scoring with Finland. Another portion of our population is scoring with Chile. And this is just basically saying, well, let's just define the content, then let's put that on state test, and then 3, teachers will uniformly teach that, and then 4, this is all it's going to take to bring every kid along to where the water rises for everybody. But yet we just saw that it's only 10% of the variance. So we're trying to make something that's very complex into something that's very simple. So if the guy flying the airplane, he looks at all these buttons and whistles and bells and all this stuff he can move and fiddle with, and do you know what that is? No, but I stayed at the Holiday Inn last night. Get me off. If you don't understand the complexity of it, I don't want to fly with you. But we're building a plane right now that is not understood. The complexity of it is simply not understood, or it's not appreciated. I want to point this out. Louisiana right now is being praised as a forerunner in having their school systems purchase the curriculum. I was talking to a lady yesterday. She's working with a charter school. The charter school was told, you either buy this curriculum or you will lose your charter. But yet, the state at the Department of Education will proudly tell you, we have no curriculum. That's up to you. So what that essentially says is at the beginning of the year, every student is going, or really at the end of the year, every student is going to have a test that measures what they learn. But at the beginning of the year, we don't bother to tell them what they're supposed to know. And then the whole thing plays out like that. And when we get through at the end, and we just don't have time to get into how you can mess with these tests, but I will tell you this, when some of the test questions are norm referenced and some of them are criterion referenced, all I got to do is sit in a room and say, what's the item response for that one? We got 34% right. What about that other one? Well, if we put that one in there, we got 84% right. Put that one in. What happens to the test scores across the state? What do I get to claim? We did a great job. And that's just simply by being able to tell what the item responses are for each one of these, whether I want to include it or whether I want to exclude it based upon the outcomes that I might want. You say that can't be true. Yes, it can. I asked the state statistician that one time in a graduate class with about 30 master's degree students sitting there, and he said, yeah, that is one way you could look at it. I was like, wow, this is really going down. Good question. Norm reference, I'm just sitting here babbling out stuff like it makes sense, right? Norm reference means you build a bell curve, which means that some people are going to do really well. By definition, they have to. And then some of them are going to do really poorly in comparison to this. It's what we call a standard population. Criterion reference, we don't care about that. What we want to make sure of, can you high jump 6 feet? Check, check, check. If everybody can high jump 6 feet, we're glad. But if it's a norm reference test, some of them can do 7'6", some of them can't do 4 feet. It spreads out. So that would be the thing. And now somehow we put those two together. Hey, Kathy.
Reference, thank you, baby.
That's a great question.
I don't know the answer, do you?
Nobody does.
No, good.
No, because all of the way these things happen is it comes out of a proprietary black box. You don't know what it is. I don't know what it is. I can't speak to that, although I have my suspicions. But we have some research that's currently being submitted to a journal in Arizona State, and we've also shortened that about the school performance scores and the value-added modeling for teachers. Oh, it's a bloody mess. And we'll be happy to get that to you to show how unstable the results are. By the way, we did a public records request, and we essentially got 4% of what we asked for. And yet we were told that everything we needed was in the document that they gave us. It just didn't happen. So this whole notion of buying curriculum, here's a problem. Suppose you live in St. Helena. Suppose you live in Red River. You don't have a lot of funds to buy these curriculum, and they're not cheap. So my question to you is this. If the Department of Education thinks it is so daggum important that your kid needs to know something and that they should know it in a certain way, why don't they give it to everybody free? And not do that all through the year and just kind of hand it out in secret. Why don't you get it on the first day? Where we would say, hey, this is where we think your kid ought to be. Your little dude, little Johnny, little Jenny, at the end of first grade, this is some of the really good stuff we'd like to see them do. And we're going to help them get there all along the way by handing out these packets that you'll have in real time. But the state says that's not our job. So this would be like if you go to the state and you're a contractor for roads and you said, can I get the spec list for the road? We don't have that. We don't have a spec list. Well, how wide? Depends on how wide you want to make it. Well, how deep? You get the picture? But that's what we're doing with our curriculum. What is it these kids are supposed to know? Go buy tier 1 stuff. We can't afford tier 1 stuff. Oh. Well, you got a problem. Well, what we've done, and this is kind of historical. People in higher levels of research or whatever, they tend to go, nobody can understand this stuff. But then what you really sometimes happens is you're going, ooh, maybe they can understand this stuff. And then you don't want that to happen. So keep this in mind. We got a broke truck, but we keep trying to do what? Paint the house. Keep that in mind, because that's kind of where this whole thing keeps going. All right, so here's one. You'll hear this all the time. Well, these curriculum are all about high expectations. Do not nibble, do not bite, do not engage. Those are code words that you can't win. Because if you're against high expectations, what does that mean? You're for what? You're for low expectations. In the meantime, true story, first grade question, Wade asked Lester, hey, can you undo subtraction with addition? Lester says, sure. And he's thinking, I don't really want to do it. But nevertheless, he says, yeah, sure. And so I asked Lester, how much is 16 minus x equals 7? And Lester says, well, the answer is 23. Wrong answer. Explain how Lester is both right and wrong, using words, symbols, and numbers. First grade. Now, we're back to this self-efficacy stuff. Are you going to tell me that a first grader can organize and execute a successful course of action to figure that out? What do you think is going to happen to this little dude? It's called stress. Big time. And now they're going to start worrying about whether I can get anything done. I must be stupid because the teacher's the closest thing to who? God. And the teacher is giving me this, so the teacher must know what? They must know close to everything. And I can't do it. I am inadequate. I am a failure. I cannot organize and execute. And I will tell you this, when you begin to have a consistently low view of your ability to organize and execute a course of action, you are a mess. It is extremely hard to undo that kind of thinking. It is because it is powerful. You get to the point where you do something right 24 times, you do it wrong once, and guess what you remember? The failure. This is my concern. We're creating in our kids, we're creating this culture where you would think this would be immoral. Yeah. Now, I have to say right now, my disclaimer is I'm not speaking on behalf of Southeastern Louisiana University. These are all my own personal thoughts because I can sometimes tend to get into this maybe a little bit further than they may want to go, but nevertheless, I have the right to say what I want to say, right? And I'll do it. Absolutely. Here's the deal. Don't ever talk about high expectations. There's two things, and only two things, that matter when it comes to a task. A, it should be challenging. B, it should be doable. Now, if it's challenging and doable, and we need to organize it and execute it, if I organize and execute something that challenges me, that's good, and then I do it successfully, or even better, I get close to it, but it's not exactly right, so I get to play it again, because guess what the biggest indicator of success is in terms of psychosocial outcomes? Perseverance, not talent. Perseverance Perseverance predicts success better than raw talent. There's reams of research on that. So we want kids to learn how to fail. We want them to learn how to fail, and then we want them to learn how to stand up again. Because if you don't even understand what redemption is. Because redemption is all about failing and then being stood up, and then failing and then standing up. Because if you don't get that picture, you think who's responsible for all of this, right? And that's not the case. But in this case, what we want these kids to do is we want them to have challenging and doable tasks because we want them to organize them and execute them. Well, if it's not doable, I can't execute it. And if it's not challenging, what's the point in organizing it? So this all kind of wraps around in the same orbit there. So here's Mr. Gates' words again. Our number one priority was and still is that all students get a great public education and graduate with the skills to succeed in the workplace. Now, this partnership that they started is called the Assessment of Readiness for Colleges and Careers. That's what it's supposed to do. So, how well do these PARCC-type exams predict readiness for college? You want to guess? What do you think? You're going to be shocked. How well do these PARCC-type assessments, these end-of-the-year course exams that are being used to say we had to do this because we have to compare everybody? That's where it all started. Because we got to get them ready for college and careers. Because if we don't, then the 2 C's in PARCC, they got nothing stuck to them, right? Because college and careers is the 2 C's. Well, here's the problem. 1 to 16% of the variance is explained about how well these tests predict. That means at best, 84% of the test, or 84% of what's happening is noise. The test didn't capture it. And at worst, 99% of what created success in college was not captured by that test. Now, why are we spending millions of dollars to find out that 99% of what's happening ain't in the thing that we're spending millions of dollars for? Why would you do that? Ouch. And I mean, when I say millions, make sure you buy stock in Pearson, because it is a multi-billion-dollar corporation, and it is poised to become even larger. So, the curriculum that we have often creates undue expectations on students. I'm assuming y'all have heard that for the last 2 days. The horror stories that have been associated with tasks that really don't provide these kids an opportunity to organize and execute. I'm sure you've heard that. I don't think we need to beat that one again. But guess which students are going to be hurt the worst in this? The kids that are scoring at the Finland level or the kids who are scoring at the Greece and Chile level? These kids are the ones who are failing all the time, and now you're heaping more failure on them. Do you think that more failure will actually create success? Beatings continue until morale improves? Negative. Which ones are going to be impacted the worst in this kind of scenario? These guys. Which are the ones? Good grief. Who are the ones that we think that we say that we're actually trying to help? These guys. The truck's still not running, and the house has 10 coats of paint. So, what does that mean? It means that untold numbers of students, your kid comes home to you with tears in their eyes and says, "Mama, I can't do this. Mama, I hate math." And you're going, "What in the world happened today?" And then you open it and you're going, "I'll get back to you." Because it's like, I don't know what to do with this stuff. So untold numbers of students are less likely to persevere. And what's the greatest predictor of success? Perseverance. We just took away the best predictor of success that we have because of what we're doing. They're not going to expend higher levels of energy. What are they going to do? They're going to quit. They're not going to demonstrate resilience. In fact, what they're going to demonstrate is defeat. then ultimately they're going to choose a possible career or an interest that is not what they were actually capable of doing. But yet this is supposed to be about career and college readiness. That just is astounding. And unfortunately, folks, this is a state of education reform today. Not only here, but in many, many, many areas. And I want to give you the last slide, and then if there's any questions. This is from the Brookings Institute, did this analysis. And they started off, and they said the states that originally went into Common Core seem to be outperforming the other states when we give them an independent third test. In other words, not the exams that the states created, but this exam that everybody else is going to take, and it just kind of comes up as a joker, if you will. It's called NAEP, N-A-E-P, National Assessment of Educational Progress. This test over here, we're going to give them after we've determined that it looks like they're making more gains over here. So you follow what I'm saying? Supposedly, if they're getting better on this test, then they should also get better where? On this test. That's the story. Well, it went like that for a couple of years, but I want you to read. But between 2013 and 15, students that didn't adopt these standards and curriculum made larger gains than those that were in the states that did. Now there is a saying, and we've just passed right over it, non-maleficent. That's a fancy word. What does it mean? Do no harm first. If we're going to do surgery on someone, there needs to be a reasonable expectation that the surgery is going to what? Help. Yes. Because if the only point of the surgery is to dismember the person, that's kind of cruel. Do you understand what I'm saying here? If this was all about supposedly trying to help the kids, but then we turn around and go, well, I'm confused. This was supposed to help the kids. And what we're seeing in 13 and 15 is we're seeing something that is upside down and inverted to that. What happened to do no harm? So that, I think, is something that should give you all pause. So when you're talking to someone, and I'll be happy to share this PowerPoint with anyone that would like it. But if you're talking to someone, it's like, do you mean to tell me that these kind of tests are only predicting like maybe 1%, and if we're lucky, 16% of what actually is helping these kids succeed in college? And we're spending all that money? I mean to tell you that. So that, I'm afraid, folks, is the state of education reform today in America, or at least in Louisiana. I've been at this gig since 1979, and I can say this with a straight face. I don't know that it's ever been worse. Because when you actually start doing the things to kids that we're doing and saying that we're doing it because it helps kids, you just keep putting paint on the house and the truck ain't running. And that is what I'd like to leave you with. Any questions? Yes, sir. You can, all right, here's my email. He asked for slide. THE, Smith Wade, the Smith Wade. I had to put the, there was somebody else that had already taken Smith Wade. So I'm like, all right, well, I'm going to come up with some kind of way to beat this deal. And that's how I did it. The Smith Wade at gmail.com. Just, hey, send me the Common Core PowerPoint, and I'll fire that dude off. The Smith Wade at gmail.com. Anybody else? Yes, ma'am. I am a professor of educational leadership. So we published quite a number of articles throughout our careers on this and similar kinds of stuff. So it is something that I have some familiarity with. Well, that's a well rehearsed act. It took me literally decades to get to the point where I could actually fool people. Yeah, sure.
Okay, so I am a newborn here. I don't know anything about this. I'm learning. So I don't have anything to offer. I guess it's more of just a little experience that I've had with my daughter who's a junior in high school in public school, and I was never a just automatically smart kid growing up. I had to study a lot. But I did graduate from Southeastern on the president's list and in mass communications. So I do have a degree. And I remember my daughter, who's 16 now, I could not help her with 5th grade math. I remember being pregnant with my now 5-year-old son. So this was 6 years ago, and she came out of her room trying to do math homework, and she was hysterical. I'm talking tears, snot, hysterical, hyperventilating, and I was like, what is wrong with you? I can't do this homework. She was freaking out. So I said, you are being a drama queen. You need to calm down, and you need to go to your room and take a break. Give me the math homework. Okay, I'm going to look over it, and we're going to get together when I'm done. You just go take a break. So I sit down on the couch, and I'm big and pregnant and everything, and I sit down on the couch, and 15, 20 minutes later, she comes out of her room, and she turns the corner, and she's like, I am hysterically crying. I am like, I cannot do this. What is wrong with these people? I mean, I could not help my 5th grade daughter with her homework. So anyway, I'm here. My husband came last night, and then I'm here today. We tag team with the baby. I have a 5-year-old son, and he's in kindergarten at a good school in Watson. And so I'm wanting to learn. I'd actually like to talk to the gentleman about homeschool after. I want to learn. I have a hunger for this. So anyway, just thank y'all for doing this. This is wonderful. Thank y'all for.
She couldn't organize and execute it, and she got stressed. You probably could have sat there and fooled with it till you delivered the baby. Right?
Yeah, I almost went into labor that day.
Exactly.
And it was so frustrating. And honestly, here I am now with my 5-year-old. I have been dreading. He started kindergarten last week. I've been dreading this day because I know it gets downhill from after kindergarten. It's all downhill from here, and that's how I look at it. It's very scary. It's frustrating.
So last night or 2 nights ago, we had our first master's class, and one of the ladies, we were talking about the notion of what is curriculum, how does it work, if you're an administrator, how do you manage it, all that kind of stuff. And she said, we've got 2 classes in our high school that have just moved over to the new Tier 1 curriculum for Algebra 1, and there are 58 students that are sitting there looking at their teacher with blank stares. And it's like, I get it, I understand, and it's a mess. But you had years of success and a college degree that told you have the ability to organize and execute, which gives you a little bit more resiliency. When you're 6 years old, that world has not come to you. Right. So if it rocked your world, imagine what it did to hers.
Yeah, it rocked my world.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
My name is Kelsey Weber. I'm way in the back here. I have a child back here, so I'm not up in the front and getting involved. I just want to say one thing before my question. I have homeschooled for several years. I've also put my children in public school in the Watson area. Love the school, love the teachers, love the principals. They're great. What are they teaching when we're not there? I can't verify that, but I do know that a lot of them are strong Christians. If you're interested in knowing about homeschool, how to do it, what to do, what curriculum, I'm back here if you want to talk. Mr. Bass also would be available, he said. My question was, though, it's probably not for everybody, but my question was, what was the first source of self-efficacy that you described? Was it inactive something experience?
Inactive mastery experience?
Mastery experience. And how did you describe that?
Yeah, so the notion is you take a task that's challenging but doable, you figure out a course of action that will be successful, you organize that course of action, then you implement that course of action, then you take that course of action to fruition, and if that course of action gets to a point where it is actually successful, then you have now gained a confidence, or your self-efficacy has enhanced for your ability to do this particular task. Now, notice what's happening here. We're talking about this particular task. There are a lot of electrical engineers that can tell you, I can sit here and do Ohm's law till the cows come home, but don't make me go write a critique about Shakespeare. So self-efficacy isn't something that just flies out of a box like a box of butterflies and just lands on everything. It depends on what your particular skills, your talents, your dispositions. So it's task specific. And that's extremely important too. It's because if you don't recognize that, just because you have the ability to organize over here, lots of people are really good carpenters, but they're not so good at electricians, right? And so it's that same kind of deal. You gain an area of expertise, but what we really want these little dudes in her age, we don't want them coming out of there worrying about being electrical engineers in the 3rd grade. We want them just kind of having a big, wide picture of, I can read, I can write, I can cipher, I can analyze, I can do good things, I can think, you know? Yeah, I'm okay. But when you take them to the point where they go, I can't even work one of the problems that you gave to me today, that can be crippling. And it can be extremely difficult to dislodge that belief later on in life.
Homeschooling your kids is this self-efficacy procedure, or the sources that you described, that inactive mastery experience, that is your lesson plan. That is how you are going to plan to teach your child. The modeling is part of how you teach your child. The verbal persuasion, the physical arousal, that positive experience they get from your praise, this is all something that as the teacher of your child, you are able to do, and you are able to increase their experience, or their positive experience with school, whereas in school they may not receive a bit of it. There's too many children.
Look, good parents kind of innately have this stuff. I had Les Miles come talk to one of my classes one time. I can tell you Les can't spell efficacy, right? I can guarantee you that. But he had this inherent understanding of, you have to put somebody in a situation, challenge them, help them, get them to be successful, use that as a basis to build it. In other words, he was just working right through social cognitive theory and never sat in one of those classes, not one time. But he understood it because he had been part of a world where he understood. I mean, you know, you're not going to take your guys and go, okay, I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to beat the living dog snot out of you Monday through Friday, and then we're going to go out there and play Alabama and give them what for. Don't think so. That isn't the way that's going to go down, right? You got to be to the point where you believe you're going to be successful when you walk out there. Otherwise, the game's over before it starts. And so that's the same thing with a kid. If I'm trying to prepare this kid to take this end of the year test because I can use this as a very powerful tool to help and shape them, because that's the state's going to make me do that, then I want to bring all of the psychological tools that I have to bear to help these kids to get to where they can be as successful as they can possibly be. But we're putting paint on the house. Yes, ma'am. Okay.
What would you say would be our first step in state level to overturn some of this?
That lady right there is a really valuable resource. She's battled this thing at some level, and I would say one of the things that we're trying to find out right now. I'm just going to kind of spill the beans a little bit. We're waiting to let the dust settle on this gubernatorial race and find out who the person is that's going to ultimately be left standing. Because at the end of the day, what we want to do is go to them and talk to them about a policy and research institute that we can kind of host. That would be something where we can start teasing some of these things out and get the answers to the people of this state. Because I can tell you right now, the people of this state right now can't get the answers. If you go ask the state of Louisiana right now, can you explain to me how much variance is being accounted for in terms of predicting whether a teacher is really successful or not by these tests? They'll tell you, yeah, we can, but you won't find out what it is. They won't give it to you because we asked. In the state public records request, that says, when you ask for this, this is the pertinent information that shall be given if it's for legitimate research purposes. Well, if we're not legitimate, I don't know when Southeastern kind of got kicked out of the house, you know, but we couldn't get it. Yes, ma'am. Yes, sir.
This is a question on a slightly different topic, but I've seen this happen. What happens in the mind of a child when they get awards for doing nothing? Attendance awards.
Yeah.
Tell me what happens.
Okay, so he asked a great question. What happens when you get rewarded for nothing? That's called a false sense of self-efficacy. You want me to give you the worst false case of self-efficacy that you can have? Hey, boys, let's go get in the car tonight, drink 9 beers, and drive 130 miles an hour because we can organize and execute that course of action, and all of us will go home safely tonight. Afraid not. So the notion of understanding what your real capabilities are is something that absolutely has to be grounded. And that's why we should not be, good grief. I mean, but we've gotten to the point where we're such a, and I hate the word, but we're such a snowflake society that we think that somehow or another we're all supposed to be experts at everything. And if you somehow tell me that you're a better guitar player than I am, then I need to go into therapy. Well, either work harder to become a better guitar player or just admit God gave this guy more talent. And then he took that talent and then he realized, I went to see Christopher Parkening play one time, world-class classical guitarist. We get to talk to him before he starts the stuff. Sold out Christian too, by the way. How often do you practice a day? Somewhere between 6 and 9 hours. Every day. He was also a world champion fly fisherman. Now, I don't know where he found the time to do it, but would you sit down and practice a guitar? Now, tell me about his self-efficacy. What is his belief in his ability to organize and execute? Through the what? Roof. And how important is the outcome to him? Through the roof. His active engagement, that's why you hear about these Olympians 4 years away from when it ever happens, and they're already planning out their days every day. This is how we're going to do this stuff that's going to ultimately lead me in 4 years from now. It's going to put me in this position to be what I want to be. That's what self-efficacy and outcome expectancy can do for you. Now, what I would prefer to think is that those things really aren't as important as we try to make them, right? And I would like to think it would just really be more about being autonomous and being someone who can live in this world and be happy in this world and those kind of things. And then also, I got to give one shameless plug before I leave, and I'm way over, and I apologize. We wrote a book, a buddy of mine who's a pastor, because what we discovered is that there's so many people that cannot give an answer for why they believe what they believe. And so if you're sitting in your house and your kid comes home and goes, Mama, they said this at school today, I'm going to tell you, the worst thing you can tell them is, well, we don't believe that way. Because all you've told them is, I'm not going to provide you any evidence that counteracts the claims that you, and so they go back to school, and this now you're putting them in two worlds. You haven't told me why I should believe, but these people over here are telling me why I shouldn't. And when you put them in that kind of a conflict, it gets messy. So we published a book. It's available through Amazon, The 4 Pillars of Christianity, Essential Knowledge for Every Christian. We have a few copies of it here. And we'd be happy to talk to you about that. That's just a shameless plug. But if you're in your house today, one of the things you're going to have to do is get your kid trained up, because I can tell you the enemy's coming. And he ain't afraid. You know, we often ask people to walk into the church. Satan is Domino's. He delivers at the door in 30 minutes or less. And if we don't understand that the scenario that we're in is kind of, hey, we got to armor up not only our kids. I've had 75-year-old women come up to me in tears and say, you just saved my faith, because for 5 years I've had these terrible questions and I didn't think they could be answered. That's a scary thought. So if that's something that interests you, we'll be over here when we finish. Yes, ma'am, Kathy.
Just real quickly. So teaching to the test, you know.
Great question. So this is what I tell my teacher. I tell every prospective administrator, teaching to the test, bad. Aligning instruction with assessment, good. What's the difference? Nothing. But this one sounds really rotten, and this one sounds really smart. So this one's just a trigger word. Never say I teach to the test. I align my assessment with my instruction. Well, if you don't, that means you were teaching something that you didn't think was important enough to be tested. But if I walk out there, if I go on the legislative floor today and say, if someone asked me, do you believe we should align our tests, do you teach to the test? If I said yes, what would happen? This guy's a knucklehead. He's no sense in listening to another word he's got to say. Do you believe we should teach to the, oh no, I don't believe that at all. I believe we should align our tests with instruction. You're absolutely right. Of course, what I just said was exactly the same thing, but I ain't going to explain that.
Exactly. Okay, outcome-based education, just that's a real buzzword that everybody hears. Could you just tell us real quickly what that is?
What is that?
Outcome-based education.
Yeah, outcome-based. When was it not outcome-based education?
That's what I want.
I mean, the last time I checked, every one of us at the end of something, we get something, right? So, but this whole notion now is about we've created these standards, and then these standards guide what we're doing, but they're not real. We just don't have time to get into that. But they're not standards at all. They're not standards, because if you tell me that I want a student to be a good free throw shooter, that's a standard. But then what I need to know is how old's the kid, how long have they been playing, how much pressure can they stand, how much practice have they had, how much air's in the ball. I got a whole bunch of things. So those are called embedded criteria. And an embedded criteria is just a fancy word for a curriculum. And we've already said in this state, we ain't got a curriculum. So on the one hand, we're trying to measure a standard without embedded criteria. Good luck.
Are there any more questions?
Yes, ma'am? Go ahead, holler at me. Yeah.
Stepdaughter was awarded the Wiggle Worm Award.
Wiggle worm?
Yes.
Well, I can see why, because what the world needs is more wiggle worms.
Yes. Yeah. She didn't get honor roll.
She got the Wiggle Worm Award.
Yeah.
And what was that exactly for? Just
Being great at wiggling and not staying in a seat, I guess. But so that's sad. But my question is, and this may be a loaded question.
every question is loaded, but that's all right.
What are the okay, because my son's in kindergarten, what are the chances of us defeating Common Core? Do I need to be looking at homeschooling right now for like next year?
Here's
Or
your
do we
lady
have a
right
good
there.
chance?
She's on the front lines.
We are going to be able to defeat this. It's going to take us working together, but with people, I don't know where you've been hiding, but people like this that are willing to stand up and tell the truth, that's what this is all about, truth in education. We're going to be able to do it. If you have to pull your son out for a year, then pull your son out if you can. But we're going to take our public education system back.
Thank you. Oh, I do have, if you want copies of any of those things, if you want to shoot pictures of them or something like that, any of the articles, I'll have them over here too. And like I said at the end, if you're interested in the other book, come talk to us about that. We'll be happy to chat.